So when BEE gets in the way of government's own goals, it is fair to ask what is costing South Africa's future. Today we're unpacking the collapse of Ramaphosa's 2019 promise, the marriage clause that pits kings against the constitution, and Washington's latest push for sanctions against ANC leaders. Plus, in the Wildcard, the outrageous tale about a local baboon who went to war. My friends, if you're enjoying the show, be sure to like and subscribe. And now, with all that out the way, let's get into it. Back in 2019, President Ramaphosa stood on the State of the Nation podium and promised that every learner in South Africa would have digital textbooks on tablet by 2025. Now, that vision was bold: bring classrooms into the digital age, close the education gap, and prepare kids for a tech-driven economy. So fast forward 6 years and the deadline has passed, and more than 16,000 schools still don't have internet access. Government says that it simply didn't have the 30 billion rand needed for infrastructure, devices, and teacher training. So while some progress was made, about 500,000 devices rolled out and 10,000 classrooms upgraded, the original promise was missed by a country mile. Now enter Starlink. Already operating in more than 20 African countries, it offered South Africa a 500 million rand equity equivalent program as a substitute to the 30% BEE ownership rule. This would have connected 5,000 rural schools and given 2.4 million learners free high-speed internet. But regulators still haven't signed off, so the offer sits in limbo. And here's the uncomfortable irony here. That 30% equity stake may have enriched a handful of beneficiaries, while Starlink's proposed alternative would have transformed education for millions of children. And so, when the numbers look like that, you have to ask, is this yet another case where BEE is doing more harm than good for our nation? Think of South Africa's marriage laws as 3 rulebooks: one for civil marriages, one for customary marriages, and one for civil unions. Now, the new marriage bill was meant to bring them all into one and finally give Muslim marriages the legal standings that courts have demanded. But here's where it gets messy. You see, in customary law, men may take more than one wife. But since a 2013 constitutional court ruling, a husband can only do so if the first wife agrees. And this is about dignity and equality, basic constitutional rights. Now you see, Clause 6 of this bill repeats this very rule, except for royal families. And yes, South Africa has kings, the Zulu king, the Venda king, and others recognized under the constitution. And so if their traditions don't require consent, the bill says it isn't needed. So supporters argue that this protects cultural and religious practices that predate the constitution. Critics warn, though, that it creates 2 classes of women: ordinary wives who have constitutional protection and royal wives who don't. And so at the heart of this is a far bigger question, which is, can cultural or religious authority ever sit above the constitution? Or must even the kings bow to it? Best you buckle up, because South Africa's relationship with Washington may be facing fresh turbulence. You see, a US senator has reportedly introduced a bill that would place targeted sanctions on ANC leaders and trigger formal reviews of US-SA relations. So you're probably wondering why this sounds so familiar, and that's because it mirrors a similar proposal in the House of Representatives earlier this year. And analysts say that having these companion bills in both chambers raises the chances of this idea becoming law. Now, you see, these bills accuse South Africa of siding with Russia and China, supporting Hamas, and making hostile remarks against Israel. They also call for a list of ANC officials allegedly implicated in corruption or human rights abuses, reportedly using the Zondo Commission's findings as a starting point. And let's just say the timing is sensitive. Trade Minister Park Tau is currently in New York for negotiations aimed at softening US tariffs on South African exports. And you see, with bills like this hanging in the background, those talks may have just become a lot harder. And before we cruise on to our Bagel Bite of the day, here's a couple other headlines worth knowing. For starters, Google is building 4 new infrastructure hubs across Africa to anchor its subsea internet cables. The aim here is foster more reliable connections for a continent where outages are common and access remains patchy and expensive. A new global study has found that most corporate climate plans aren't worth the paper they're written on. While 95% of big firms pledge action, only approximately 2% show credible strategies to cut emissions or shift away from coal and oil. And Momentum has absolutely smashed another profit record, posting 6.26 billion rand in headline earnings, up 46%. Now, strong underwriting and investment performance drove results alongside a 1 billion rand share buyback. The group also declared a final dividend of 90 cents. And on to our final Bagel Bite of the week. Let's end it in the win column. Let's see what you got. The question is, what is the oldest university in the world still in operation? Is it A, the University of Oxford, B, the University of Bologna, or C, the University of Edinburgh? Bonus points if you know in what century it was founded. And on to our wildcard section. South Africa's World War I history has its fair share of surprises, but none stranger than a baboon named Jackie. So according to the Heritage Portal, Jackie belonged to Private Albert Marr of the 3rd South African Infantry. When Marr enlisted in 1915, he brought his pet with him, and Jackie became the regiment's mascot, dressed in uniform, and even issued a paybook. Now, soldiers recall him sitting in the dining area, carrying food, and even alerting troops of any incoming strangers. But the legends go further. Some accounts claim that Jackie was officially promoted to corporal, that he saluted officers, lit their cigarettes, and that he also fought at the Battle of Delvelwood before being wounded by shrapnel. Others say he was treated in a military hospital and even awarded medals. While none of that is actually on the record, what is certain is that Jackie did return home after the war, lived with the Marr family, and sadly died in 1921 during a farm fire. Now, either way, fact or folklore, Jackie remains one of South Africa's strangest war characters. And as for that Bagel Bite, the answer is Bologna, founded in 1088, making it the world's oldest university still running. Oxford came a few years later in the 12th century, and Edinburgh only much later in 1538. And so, just think about that for a second. Bologna has been teaching continuously for nearly 1,000 years, through plagues, wars, and empires rising and falling. That's a longer track record than most countries. And my friends, that's it for today's show, and that's it for the work week. Thanks so much for tuning in until the very end. Hope you guys all have a cracker Friday, a fantastic weekend, and I'll catch you all same time on Sunday evening. God bless.